Here we go, going live. Hello everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you from a remote location. Matter of fact, in the guest bedroom of my daughter and son-in-law's house down south of Austin. Congratulations to us. We just had another grandbaby, number 12. We had number 11 back in earlier in May, and number 12 just came across the transom on Monday. So we're hanging out here. They came home today, so I got to hold and meet little Hadley, 8 pounds, 4 ounces, 20.5 inches long. Glad you guys are joining us. I thought today we'd talk about how to grow true trophy bluegills. So I think that's going to be the topic. And of course, you guys know how to play the game. If you will click like right there, share this to your video, and hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, you'll be eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a mug. Of course, I didn't bring that with me because I didn't know I was running down to Austin. Hey, Pond Boss Magazine. I see Robbie Shell, Kenneth Dwiggins. Hello, hola. There's John Funk. I saw Robbie Shell in there. Let's see here. So let me do what I do to see what I can see. I see Mike Cottrell just clicked like. So here we go. We're going to talk about raising bluegills. So let me see if I can find the video so I can watch it myself. There we go. Kenneth Dwiggins, Mike Cottrell, Tori Rhodes. Good to see Tori back on board. Danny Mack. I know Danny Mack's been hanging out by his pond there in the hills outside of San Antonio. Absolutely stunningly beautiful place he's got there. So let's talk about, let's see, I see Robbie Shell, Bruce Condello, and I'm not sure who else has joined, Tom Blasdell, Roger B. Peterson. Hi, Bob. It really got warm lately, and my pond is a good portion of it covered with pea-green, a pea-green surface-only algae. What algaecide or process would you use to mitigate this problem? The pond is in its second year in Missouri. Thanks. Water values pH 7.4, ammonia 0, nitrate 0, phosphate, and alkalinity. Well, odds are that what you've got, and we are going to talk about growing trophy bluegill. I'm glad Bruce is on here because Bruce can help chime in because Bruce has grown some gigantic bluegill. I see Chris Chavetta. What do you call your grandbabies, Fry? You know, man, I tell you what. When I was younger, breeding and reproducing, it never dawned on me that all these people would grow up, then they'd have a bunch of babies, and I'd be going to a dozen birthday parties, dance recitals, ball games, and all that every year. So it makes kind of a busy schedule. Last weekend, I guess it was a week ago today, a big storm blew through, and 90 to 100 mile an hour winds between Navasota and Brenham, Texas, and blew down a bunch of trees at my son's place. So I grabbed 2 older grandchildren, one big enough that could haul limbs and one big enough to babysit, and we drove down to Washington, Texas, and spent 3.5 days down there helping clean up a mess. Just as I got home, Debbie, who's been hanging out with Ashley for about 2.5 weeks, I got home Sunday night at 6:30, and at 7:15 I was settled in, writing, working on Pond Boss for the next issue. By the way, $35 a year, guys, Pond Boss Magazine. I noticed a number of you have been subscribing. I thank you for that. So anyway, 7:15 Monday morning, the phone rings, and it's Debbie. She says, hey, Ashley's in labor, her water broke, she's gone to the hospital, you need to get to Austin. Well, it's about a 4.5 hour ride, and it took me about 3 hours to get where I could leave. And by the time I hit the road, 10:15 that morning, little baby Hadley, number 12, made her entrance into the world. So what do we call them? Fingerlings? Fry? I don't know, I like all that stuff, but they're pretty fun to hang around with. And while they've been in the hospital, we've been taking care of their 2-year-old toddler. Chase one of those around. You guys ever watch the Flintstones when you were growing up? Remember Pebbles and Bam Bam? I've been hanging out with Bam Bam, and I'm telling you, he's spitting image. Blonde hair, round face, built like a fire plug, runs over stuff. He's fun. He is fun. So let's see here. Let's go back to that question from Roger B. Peterson. Roger B. Peterson, you know what? That pea-green surface-only algae is dead. So what happens when the temperature fluctuates a lot, especially when it goes from cool to warm and then back to cool, and then back to warm, it's going to take out whatever planktonic algae that you've got. If it's pea-green soup, then it's either going to be blue-green algae or it's going to be a planktonic algae. So there's really not much you can do about that, because once it looks like spilled paint on top of the water, it's dead. It's out there. Now, Kelly Duffy, I see he's on here. He might want to chime in with an answer to your question. But what you need to do is follow up and see the visibility depth. So be checking how far down you can see. If you guys have a pond and you don't have a Secchi disc, get a Secchi disc. So you can measure the visibility of the water, because the depth you can see down the water measured is going to help you decide what to do. I talk to guys all the time and I'll ask them, what's your visibility? It's 8 inches. Have you measured it? No. Are you close to the pond? Yes. Let's measure it. It's 21 inches. You know, so knowing that depth of visibility makes a big difference, and it's going to make a difference as to what people are going to advise that you do about it. So if your visibility right now with water temperature going up, if it's less than about 18 inches, you want to do something about it. At least investigate it and be on point, be prepared to do something about it. So let's see here. Harrison Davis got the popcorn popping. That's good. John Funk, looks like it's time to clear some channel cat out of the pond. Lots of them this year. Yours reproduced. There's Dan Drollop. Howdy. Ryan Lawrence. Yeah, we're going to talk about big bluegills, so give me just a second. I see John Wilson checking in from Ohio. Oh, he's for hanging out in Ball Ground, Georgia. He's over there at the East Coast office. Kenneth Dwiggins is, David Schneiderman's checking in. Hey, David, looks like we're going to be headed home tomorrow, so I can come look at your pond with you as soon as I get back. I mean, we got a baby. I got to meet her, got to hold her. And now we're going to take the 2-year-old and take him to his aunt's house up in McKinney, and then we're going to head home. And then I can go take a look at your pond with you. See, Kenneth Dwiggin's asking, what plants help a pond? Well, one of my favorites is American pondweed. I love eelgrass. Bushy pondweed, I like it. It can get too dense. Avoid plants like hydrilla. Don't ever do hydrilla. If you do that, don't ever call me again. That's a bad plant for small ponds. Coontail can be invasive. So figure out some of the plants that are native to where you are. And then in some cases, I like curly leaf pondweed because it grows when it's cool, right in the middle of the spawn. Then it just, when it gets hot, it dies back. So it kind of depends on where you are. But those are the main plants. Hi, Clark Cole. Christopher Aguilar's checking in. Daddy's in the house. Mike Singley, thank you very much. Let's see. Thoughts and tips on feeding red ear bluegill. You know, I don't usually use, if you're talking about the hybrid red ear bluegill, somebody called it we talked about it last week, speckle belly perch. Haven't used any of those, but I'm fixing to get into this. Barry Gann, Harrison Davis, Willie House checking in. Willie, I'll be home tomorrow. Holy cow, we've been traveling a lot. Grandkid stuff, kids stuff. What's the word on painted bluegill? Do they have a top end growth edge versus a copper nose? You know what, Tori? I'm not totally confident about that. You know, there's one guy that's trying to make a name for painted bluegills, and I haven't actually worked with those, and I think they're just some kind of a pigment variation. So I can't imagine that they would be any more advantageous than native bluegills to your part of the country. So I don't know that there's any advantage. Now, copper-nosed bluegill, I'm all for those south of a line. If you draw a line, say, 60 miles south of Oklahoma City, east and west, through about Little Rock, near Memphis, Nashville, Tennessee, all the way to the East Coast, and then go up the Atlantic seaboard, south of that line, copper-nosed are a great choice. So, let's see here. Lance Frederickson. Holy cow, I'm getting behind, and I haven't even started the topic yet. We're nine minutes in. Congratulations on the birth, sir. Thank you very much. The best of grandkids, have fun and give them back. Yeah, it's pretty funny because I was teasing last weekend. I was at my son's place, and all these young guys were there, and 2 of them brought their little boys. So I started playing with their little boys, and I've got a grandson there that just turned 5 and one that's 2.5. And one of these kids was almost 5 and the other one was 3. So between Gentry, my 11-year-old granddaughter, and me, we were trying to wrangle 4 little cats running all over the place. So we got pretty tired pretty quick, and toward the end of that little excursion, the daddy came up. He said, well, how'd the kids do? I said, man, they did great. I taught them how to fight, hit each other in the mouth, and I bought them both a drum set. Take them home. So it was pretty fun. So let's see. Have fun and give them back. That's right. Ha ha. My question is it safe to put tilapia in on year 1? I just filled the pond and have it fully stocked with redder, sunfish, and bluegill. The question is it safe? It's safe. Now, I don't know that I would do it because tilapia really serve two purposes. Tilapia are algae eaters. So if you've got an abundant amount of algae and you want it to go away, they're a good choice. The other thing is they reproduce exponentially, and they in with bass, they increase survival rates of baby bluegills in the fall. Well, you don't have any bass in there preying on bluegills, so your survival rate of bluegills are going to be great. So I don't really see a need to go ahead and stock tilapia in year one before bass have been stocked. Hey Vito, looks like we're headed home tomorrow. I'm going to get to be able to come see you. I'm excited about that. Let's see here. I got a lot of stops to make tomorrow the next day. Let's see. Okay, Roger B. Peterson, Secchi disc is 8 inches. All right, you need to be calling. If it's 8 inches right now, June the 3rd, then I think it's a wise idea to get a professional opinion as to what you need to do about it. So I don't remember where you are. My apologies. I have a hard time remembering where everybody is. But I would ask somebody to take a look at it that's close to you that can counsel you on what you need to do, because you may need to treat that stuff. Now, another thing you can do is go on the Pond Boss website, click on the resource guide, and look at some of the approved applicators that we've got there, and you can get some good ideas there. See Michael Gray and Mike Rosa checking in. Let's see, Justin Shank, hybrid striped bass, channel catfish, bluegill, all in the same half-acre pond. Anything wrong with that? No, it's just a small pond for all that. You can't have very many of each. You know, and if you can aerate the water, that's going to help you, but I don't see anything wrong with that. Channel catfish, bluegill, hybrid striped bass. No, it kind of depends on the numbers. See, Ron Ardoin, Chuck Brinkman. Let's see here. Let me scroll on down a little bit. You know what? I'm going to look back down this in a minute. Topic is raising trophy bluegills. So what I want to do is I want to take you through some tips on how to grow giant bluegills. I'll come back to your questions here in a minute. So keep them coming. I'll circle back on them. But one of the things I've learned over time is there's several fundamental rules that you need to follow. First of all, you gotta protect the first fish that you stock, because that's your best chance to grow huge fish. Now, what prompted me with this topic is Bruce Condello on Big Bluegill posted a picture of a 3-pound, 1 ounce, I think like 13 plus inch bluegill that he caught at Kingfisher Society's Richmond Mill Lake that I helped grow. And I'm going to give you that lake as an example, because that's an exceptional lake. That's a blackwater lake. pH is 5.3. There's 0 alkalinity. Water flow rate, 6,000 to 10,000 gallons per minute every day of that lake's life flowing through the lake and going over the spillway. So the water is consistent. It's consistently poor. So what we decided we were going to try to do there is that we knew that lake could not be limed, wouldn't be efficient. We couldn't fertilize it. So what we decided was to see if we could feed the fish and make fish food the primary source of nutrition, in the hopes that one of the byproducts is building a food chain via aquatic plants, insects, etc. And in fact, that's what happened. Now, what we didn't know was how big the bluegill would get. So we stocked feed-trained largemouth bass. We stocked bluegill at 1,000 per acre for a 125-acre lake. That's a lot of fish. Stocked a bunch of fathead minnows, and the lake already had a population of fish in it. Now, they had drawn that lake down to fix the dam, and it took them 4 years to fix the dam. The lake never got smaller than 30 acres, and they harvested as many big bass as they could, which wasn't many because that lake is not naturally productive. So what happened is, as we started feeding the fish, I guess we were probably about 2 years in, and Jim Morgan sends me a picture of a 2-pound bluegill. And he's not thinking much of it. And I'm about to climb through the phone looking at that text. So I call him. I said, hey, you got any more pictures? He said, no, there were some people watching this fish from the bridge. You can see the lake from the bridge where the water spills over down the stream. And he said, we didn't want those people to see that fish. So I said, do you realize that a 2-pound bluegill is about the equivalent of a 12-pound bass? He said, no, I had no idea. So that's when I really started seeing that that lake was going to really grow some nice bluegills. So here are some of the tips. You want to preserve the first fish that you stock, because those are going to be the fish that have the best chance early on to grow to huge sizes. That's a big deal. Number two, what I've told crowds in the past in speeches that I give about growing fish is this. I probably started saying this 25 years ago. Folks, I have held maybe 1 2-pound bluegill, 2 2-pound bluegills, maybe 10 that are 1.5 pounds, but I have held thousands of 1.25 pounds and tens of thousands of 1-pound bluegills in my hands. Well, starting about 7 or 8, 10, well, I guess now this is 2020. So this is probably about 2013. These lakes that we were feeding started cranking out these bigger bluegills. And now I can tell people I have probably held 2,000 or 3,000 2-pound plus bluegills, 2.25, 2.5, an occasional 3-pounder, because those are just beastly huge, off the Richter scale huge. And the big difference is the fish food and the kind of feed. So back then we were feeding a grain-based fish food. Now, especially with Richmond Mill Lake, got to work with Purina's nutritionists, and they started fine-tuning the Aquamax line of products specifically to grow bigger bluegills and to grow feed-trained largemouth bass and hybrid striped bass. So once that feed was refined, we started really cranking it up and feeding it to these fish. And that single event there has been a huge turning point into growing way, way, way bigger bluegills. Now, not only is the fish food critically important, there's some other things. In your pond, you want to minimize survival of reproduction of bluegills. So in other words, the best way to do that, especially in small water, say 2 to 4 acres or even smaller than that, is if you're feeding the bluegills, I would definitely feed the bluegills, feed them Aquamax MVP. That's the best feed out there to grow big bluegills that I know of that I've used, all right? And so the other thing is you need to be a little bit bass crowded. Now, I have seen big bluegills grow in 2 specific situations with bass. One is when we're trying to grow trophy largemouth bass. When we're doing that, it takes a great big bass to eat a great big bluegill. So the bluegills have a tendency to grow in tandem with those giant bass, because the bass can eat the small ones that just aren't growing fast enough or aren't getting big enough. The second one is if the bass are crowded in, say, 10 to 14-inch bass that are helping reduce reproduction rate success of bluegills. So keeping the bluegill numbers down some or growing them in conjunction with trophy bass are 2 big secrets in trying to grow big bluegills. Now, the other big secret is never, ever, ever harvest your biggest bluegills. The reason is once they start to reproduce, their growth rates level off. They may grow more, but they're not going to top out at what they could because they're so focused on reproducing. Especially in the southern states when they spawn 4 or 5 times a year, so much energy goes to gamete production or eggs and milk that they just don't grow as big as they could. So if you preserve your biggest bluegill, they're going to be the ones defending the nests. So other bluegill have to grow larger than they are to bump them off the nests. Now keep in mind, bluegill live 6 to 8 years typically across the United States. So that is your span of time to try to go the biggest one. So another secret is be sure they get the nutrition they need when they're really, really young. Now, guys like Chuck Brinkman, who watches this show every week, he makes it a point that when he sees bluegill on beds, shortly after that, he's coming out with like a Purina fry starter fish food, and he's throwing that out in shallow water so the little bitty bluegill can get feed trained when they're about 1/2 inch long. Now, if you're willing to do something like that, you're going to increase your survival rates and your growth rates as long as you got predator fish in there to thin their numbers. And the best of the best are going to excel. You also need good habitat for bluegill to be able to hide, because you want the best of the best to grow as fast as they can, and you need them to have a place to hide so that predation is not overboard. You want the bass to eat a bunch of them, but you don't want them to eat all of them, because if that happens, there goes your recruitment for the next classes coming up after your first stocked fish. So another secret is to I think it's a great idea to stock bluegill every year or every other year. And the best way to do it is if you've got a hatchery pond, like what Bruce Condello has done in the past, is he'll take the best bluegills he's got, move them to a pond, let them spawn, and then come in and harvest either by trapping or seining and cull the best of the best and keep them growing, or put them into the big lake to where they can grow up in the big lake. So here's that secret. Don't let your pond depend on recruitment for you to bring in the next fish that can grow into trophy sizes in your 8, 9, 10, and 11. So plan on stocking more bluegills every year or at least every other year to recruit new fish, faster growing fish than what you would naturally spawn in there. Another secret, feed year round if they'll eat. Over at Kingfisher Society, we made a decision once we saw those bluegills growing so huge. Now, of course, on that lake that was totally dependent on fish food, we were feeding those fish every day, and sometimes I think there were settings where we were feeding 3 times a day, and the bluegill would just tear it up. Well, in the winter, when the temperatures got down into the low 50s, headed toward the upper 40s, of course, the bluegills get sluggish, the bass go off feed. So what we did was we cherry-picked out of those 50 feeders that we had. I think we picked out 10 feeders where we knew the bluegill were most active, and we cut them back to 1 feeding per day in the middle of the afternoon when it was going to be warmest on a wintry day. So we continued to feed them a little bit of fish food all winter long, not knowing if they would consume all of it. But when several 3-pound bluegills were caught, I knew at that point it was because those fish ate over the winter, didn't lose any weight. Because if you think about it, if you grow a great big bluegill up until, Thanksgiving or shortly after, and then you see the feeding frenzy subside slowly and the fish aren't coming to the feeder, if you cut the feed off completely, then they're going to be metabolizing their own fat. So as they metabolize that fat, if they metabolize all that fat to keep their metabolism going, if they keep their breathing and nutrition and all that kind of stuff, if they don't have a lot of natural food to eat, they're going to lose weight. And when they lose weight for more than 5 or 6 days in a row, they can't make that up. So if you really want to grow some giant bluegills, consider feeding them just a maintenance volume of feed through the course of the winter. Now, John Funk, that won't apply to you because you can't feed through ice. And so now with Jacob West, I see Jacob's watching. One thing I'm going to encourage Jacob to do over the winter, we haven't talked about it yet, but feeding those fish over the winter months, even if just a minimal amount of fish food, the best of the best, most aggressive fish, they're going to eat that. And that's one of the secrets to growing huge, huge bluegills. And then when you're harvesting fish, keep a few records. Look at lengths and weights. Treat those bluegill just like you would your bass. Weigh and measure them. Check their relative weights and compare. Because with a 6 to 8 year lifespan, you don't have the same grace period to grow something huge like you do with a bass that lives 13 to 15 years. So there's my fundamental secrets of trying to grow big, big bluegills. Plan on the originally stocked fish to get the biggest to start. Recruit fish by stocking some bluegills, and if you can grow your own bluegills and cull and put some, like for example, I did a show here a few weeks ago about seining our hatchery pond. We seined a 1/10 acre hatchery pond, and I've been feeding those fish for 18 months. We got 500 plus 6 to 8 inch bluegill with a few 9-inchers in there. Those were 18 months old. Then we had another 400 plus that were in the 4 to 5 inch size class, and 12,000 plus little bitty bluegills that ranged in size from 1 1/4 inch, 1.5 inches, up to 2.5 inches long, and a 1/10 acre pond. So if you're wanting to recruit some fish, that's a good way to do it, because they're competitive, they're going to feed well, and then you can go in and harvest a crop and move a bunch of fish at one time. And that makes a big, big difference. Ron Ardois, I can see that. I can feed year round, no winter. Yes, you can. And now, guys, you also got to pay attention to your water quality. So feed year round, preserve your biggest fish, plan on having some bass to help regulate reproduction. You can't grow giant bluegills if there's 10,000 mouths to feed. You can't do it. You can't do it because even if you want to feed them all they're going to eat, there's still competition for space, and there's still going to be a pecking order, and you got to be able to have some bass in there that are going to, or some other predator fish that can help get their numbers down, or you're not going to grow giant bluegills. Copper nose compared to northern strain or native bluegills, I'm a much bigger fan of bluegills that are native to your area than bringing some from way over there 500 miles away and put them into your pond. Now, with that said, I'm a big fan of copper nose bluegills in areas where they can thrive. That won't be Iowa. It can be Arkansas. It absolutely can be Louisiana, North Carolina, which Richmond Mill Lake has proved it. So there's some tips on growing some huge bluegills. Feed a great feed. Purina's Aquamax MVP is my go-to feed to grow big bluegills. There's 9 pellet sizes, some of those pellets sink, which allows some of the smaller, maybe less aggressive or even younger fish to get a chance to eat and give them a chance to grow as well. So, cull, if you're going to cull, take the next size down. Preserve the biggest ones. Feed through the winter. So there's a bunch of your tips to grow some big ones. So now let me start looking at this. I'm 74 comments behind. Let's see. Let me look back here just a minute. Bear with me here. Matt Singh, I got 10 grass carp in a 2-acre pond. And there's 4 or 5 coming to the fish feeder when it goes off. Should I start taking some out? I was going to start bow fishing a little. The purpose of grass carp is to eat vegetation. If you've got a football field and you got 5 guys mowing it every day, at some point you don't need 5 guys. So look at that more as a decision with the vegetation. So I would say that I would not be opposed to taking out of 10 grass carp in a 2-acre pond. If they've got the vegetation managed like you want, go ahead and take out 4 or 5 of them if you want. Best remedies for duckweed. Yep, we can get Kelly Duffy will chime in here because there's I got to tell you this, guys. As much as I love pond management, one of the things I don't enjoy as much is treating plants. So about 12 or 13 years ago, I had hired some guys, and I stepped away from treating aquatic plants. So back then, the best remedies in my mind for duckweed, the very best I thought was Fluoridone. Now, I know there's some other herbicides out there, and I don't want to name them because I'm not confident that I know what I'm talking about. But we'll see what Kelly says because I'm sure he's watching. I think I saw his name a while ago. So Kelly can tell you what's best for duckweed, but Fluoridone has always been one of my go-to choices. And I'm just not good on chemicals, fellas. Let's see here. Travis Smith. I'm officially on the Aquamax Texas Hunter feeder team. Welcome, because you won't go wrong, man. Got 2 feeders. They're awesome. They really are good feeders. I know people oftentimes complain about the price because they are expensive, but then again, you get what you pay for. You know, I was talking to a guy today that wants to build a lake in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky, and we were talking about how to choose the right contractor, which I wrote an article about that for Pond Boss. By the way, 35 bucks, guys. 35 bucks a year. Let's take a commercial right quick. Bam, Pond Boss magazine right here. 35 bucks a year, cheaper than a Friday night date and lasts longer. I was talking about choosing a contractor. And so he was used to working for an agency that has certain criteria for bids. And I said, you know what, you can do that if you'd like, but when I'm looking to choose a contractor, I'm looking for somebody that can do the job, do it efficiently like it needs to be, as I'm doing my due diligence to make sure I know what efficiently means and what that pond needs to be, what it needs to look like, how it needs to be built. Then we pick the best contractor. And it doesn't matter if he's the lowest bidder or not. It doesn't matter if he's within 10% of the lowest bidder. What it boils down to is, can he do the job? Are you confident? Can you have a good relationship with him? One of the things I love about Texas Hunter is I don't have any doubt that those feeders are going to be outstanding feeders, and they're going to do really, really well. And if there's ever any issues, Texas Hunter stands right behind them, and they take care of it every single time, which doesn't happen very often. So let's see here. Brian Lawrence. Hello, Bob. I have bushy pondweed issue last couple of years. 1.8 acres surface. Added 3 grass carp. I was approved up to 15. Not looking like 3 will be enough this year. Should I add more or treat? And if treating with herbicide, what do you recommend for treating? I just got American pondweed for the first time and want to protect it and get rid of the bushy pondweed. All right. Well, I'm pretty confident to tell you what I'd like to do there. There's my niece, Mel Rothermel. Hello, Melissa. Good to see you, honey. So what I would do there is I would look at if you've got more than, now listen to me, if you've got more than 35 or 40% coverage of bushy pondweed on that 1.8 acre pond, map it out and see how much surface area it covers. If more than 35 or 40% of the pond is covered in bushy pondweed, then consider treating about 1/3 of it and taking it out with herbicides to get the grass carp a chance to catch up. Now, one of the caveats there is I don't know if that's the only habitat that you've got for fish. If it is, then you need to pay attention to how much you take out, because you got shallow water, it's going to grow. If you don't have other habitat, that is your habitat, it carries some weight in my mind. So I would look at a combination of treating with a herbicide. My favorite is Aquathol K. Kelly Duffy knows others that are more of his favorites, and he can tell you more about that. And preserve the American pondweed as best you can. Let's see, Tony Sutton, in a new 22-acre lake, should I stock less adult bluegills than the 1,000 fingerlings per acre? Okay, what you need to do there, Tony, is if you want to get in touch with me, I'll help you design a stocking plan based on what your goals are. So anytime you're stocking adult fish compared to fingerlings, you do need to stock fewer. Like, for example, if we're talking about bass and you want to grow trophy bass, we might say stock 100 bass fingerlings per acre because we know there's going to be attrition. But if you're going to stock bigger fish, it's more like 20 per acre. So in the bluegill, yes, you do stock fewer adults. But what we need to know is what your goals are. If your goals are to grow trophy largemouth bass, if your goals are to expedite growth rates, then I'd be looking at a combination of different sizes. I'd be looking at some adult bluegills, some medium-sized bluegills, and some small bluegills. You know, one of the cool things in today's world is that we've got a lot of different kind of stocking options because we have a more varied supply of different sizes of different species of fish we can stock now that we didn't have 25 or 30 years ago. So let's, if you want to email me, boblusk@outlook.com, and tell me what your game plan is. I'll help you with a stocking plan and kind of coach you through that. Yes, Christopher Aguilar, congrats on the new baby. Yep, we got a brand new baby. Hey, Mark Newman, Labhart, and Lambert. Mark Newman, Lambert. Mark Lambert. Good to see Mark. Drew Bachman checking in from North Cackalack. David Figg from Atlanta, Georgia. All right, Ron's going to beat the Mudcats. I see Vito checking in. We talked a while ago. Let's see. John Shepard, hello from Missouri. Sectioned off a small area of my lake with some cedars and tires laying down for spawning. With a depth of 4 feet, I've been raising fatheads and shiners. Got our first spawn last week. After killing off the water shield for the past 2 years, things are coming back to life and time to replenish the forage base. Good stuff. Good stuff. That all sounds right on the money to me. Chuck Brinkman, are channel catfish a real threat to bluegill as they get bigger? Absolutely, yes. Channel catfish are actually, once they hit about 2.5 pounds, they're very active predator fish, and they're going to eat as many fish as they can. You know, if you think about it, a 3-pound channel cat probably has a similar mouth size as about a 1.75 pound to 2-pound bass. So yeah, they're going to eat some bluegills, no question about it. They'll even eat little bass. So now the good thing about channel cat is you can minimize their competition with fish food. So if you can kind of keep them satiated with fish food, and one thing to remember about channel catfish, their behavior is primarily nocturnal. You know, so they love to be moving out at night, especially in the dark of the moon. That's when they're the most active. Channel catfish are wary of sun. You know, people think they're bottom feeders. They're really not. They're more like a teenager. You know, they'd rather eat meat, but when they go to the refrigerator, if all there is vegetables, they'll eat vegetables. But once they get big like yours, they become very active predators. I can see your channel catfish eating 5 and 6 inch bluegills. Mark Dauber checking in from Pensacola, Alabama. Tony also wants to stock F1s, Northerns, and Pure Floridas. What percentage of each? Lake is just north of I-40 by 20 miles. You know, we need to have a conversation. if you don't mind, send me an email and I'll call you and talk you through that. Because if you're north of I-40, and depending on the depth of the lake and how much of the water falls straight off, just the configuration of the lake is going to make a difference as to whether I tell you to stock pure strain Floridas or F1s or Northerns. In this case, in your case, I think I'd be more tempted to stock some Northerns and F1s and then come back and replenish those F1s every 2 to 4 years just to keep that gene pool at the F1 status. Because once those fish grow up and they start to reproduce, they're not going to be F1s anymore. They can't. Okay, Chad Donaldson says, do I really need to build gravel spawning beds for bluegill? Not if they're spawning elsewhere. If they're spawning in sand or if they've got some hard pan clay, and if they're spawning and you don't need, and you can see them spawning, then I wouldn't worry about building any spawning beds. I know this, Jacob West and his dad built a bunch of spawning beds. Their lake is about probably 4 or 5 feet from being full, 13 acres or so. And Jacob sent me a picture earlier this week of bluegills all over the spawning beds. I think we stocked 600 adult bluegills in that lake, if I remember right. And they've already built beds in that gravel, and they're spawning like crazy. So you don't have to have gravel. You just increase your odds of success with it. But if you've got a pond where bluegill are spawning, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's Bridget West checking in. Let's see here. Christopher Aguilar says Ron Ardoin cooks a mean sausage gravy. I've eaten his cooking. Yeah, he's a home run hitter, buddy. There's Mark Primo checking out. He's one of your neighbors checking in with us. Kevin Briggs. Let's see. Harrison Davis. If I have a pond with a solid number of bluegill 8-9 inches with occasional 10-incher, why won't I ever be catching a bigger one than 10? That's probably because they've maxed out. They've topped out at that size. Now, you can make them heavier than that by feeding them, but if those fish have already got 5 or 6 years of growth on them, they're probably not going to get any longer. They'll just get heavier. So their relative weight's between 100 and 110. You might be able to push their relative weight up to about 120 to 130 by feeding them. But if they've already aged out, age 6 or 7, close to 8, then chances are they're not going to get any longer. All that means is those fish didn't get what they needed early in life, like from age 0 up to age 1.5. They didn't have the nutrition they needed. And then another thing about it, once they sexually mature, like those fish, Harrison, they're going to be the ones that are focused on reproducing. So the next generation of the fish coming up behind them are going to be the ones that have the best chance to get much, much larger. There's Dave Terry, my good friend, Texas Parks and Wildlife. Hey, I heard you're retiring, dude. Let's have a conversation. I'm excited to hear about that for you. Harrison Davis has been fishing in that pond for 14 years. So what's going on in that pond is once those fish hit about 10 inches, and they haven't been fed, I'm going to presume, if you'll feed those fish, the next generation coming up behind those 10-inchers will have a better opportunity to hit 11 or 12 inches long. So I think that's the player there. I see Leanne checking in, Jake Carroll, Bobby Gatlin watching, Chris Lusk checking in, Chance Birch. We have a family 2-acre pond and it's never been managed. I bought some Perfect Pond Plus to put in, but I was told if you start fertilizing, you have to keep it going every year or just don't do it at all. That's not true. Now, what goes on, though, is once you initiate a plankton bloom, and whether you keep that bloom or not is going to depend on the temperature and flow rate and alkalinity. As long as you've got good alkalinity in the water and that pond doesn't flow very fast, if you don't have a lot of water flushing out your fertilizer, then it'll keep the bloom. I've seen ponds where we fertilized once or twice each year for the first 2 or 3 years and not ever have to fertilize them again. And it's just because that pond's got the right circumstances. It's got the right depths. It's got the right natural alkalinity. It's got the right kind of runoff coming off of nearby fields that help with the fertility levels. So that's not a total thing. But you also look at it like this as well, Chance. Fertilizer doesn't cost much money. So once you get a bloom going, and if you lose that bloom, if the water goes clear, it doesn't cost that much to do it again. It really doesn't. And it doesn't take nearly as much fertilizer the second time, depending on flow rates. I see Chris Stillman, Rick Waits, Ron says he can feed year-round. Yep, boy, I'm way behind, guys. Let's see. John says, John Shepard, so I presume then release the biggest bluegill we catch, keep some of the smaller to eat. Yes, absolutely right. That's right. Mike Cottrell caught a bluegill red ear. Have you heard of that? Pound Forum on Facebook is saying that's what they're thinking by the picture. Okay, I haven't seen that. I don't think I've seen that. Put it on the Pond Boss page and let me look at it, or send it to me in a private message. We got a tropical storm coming, going to take away Ron's fish. Yeah, I'm glad he's really happy to hear that. Zach Bollinger. Hey, Zach. How you doing, buddy? Travis Paul Smith talked to a hatchery in Mississippi last week. He told me once 2 to 3 inch and 4 to 6 inch feed train F1 bass will go away from feed once they're stocked in the pond. Your thoughts? That depends on how big they are and how many you stock. Now, if you stock, 3 inch F1 bass, the chances of them staying on feed is low. Now, what a lot of guys will do is they'll overstock them, but be ready to cull them. Now, that's going to be your choice. Another thing about whether or not they stay on fish food is how often you feed them. If you're feeding them 1 time a day and you're feeding Aquamax MVP, odds are high that they're not going to stay on that feed. But if you're feeding them 4 times a day or 5 times a day, every 4 hours or 5 hours, something like that, then you increase your odds. Now, you need to be feeding where those fish are going to be hanging out. So you're going to increase your odds. But the answer to that is once those fish go in the lake, if they're not presented feed on a regular basis, yes, they will go off fish food. If you're stocking the fingerlings. Now, if you buy some of these later on in the fall that are already 7, 8, 9, 10 inches long, they're going to be on fish food. But if you go buy fingerlings right now and they're small, chances are they won't stay on that fish food unless you work at it. Okay, hey guys, remember, hashtag PondBoss Magazine, click like, share this to your timeline, and you'll be eligible for a drawing for a PondBoss hat, which I'm hanging out at my daughter's house down near Austin. I didn't bring a hat, I didn't bring a mug, but you guys know the drill. $35 a year. It's well worth it. And man, I got a little gnat buzzing around my head. I don't know why. I took a bath. Christopher wants to know, do y'all take payments over the phone? Yes, we do. Absolutely, we do. Let's see, Danny Mac, not good on chemicals. I think you must have taken organic chemistry at A&M. Engineer looked better to me, so no organic required. I did take organic chemistry 3 times, dropped it twice. I wasn't that good at it, but I finally figured it out. Okay, Michael Kerbo says, got a Texas Hunter feeder going on his 15-acre lake. Excellent move. What kind of feed are you feeding? The kind of feed you choose is going to be contingent on what you're wanting to do with it. So if you want to feed catfish or carp or something like that, feed a cheap feed. If you want to grow bigger fish, feed a better feed. MVP Aquamax Sport Fish is my pick. I see Steve Snow, my good friend from high school, from Richland High School, class of 1973. There's Jim Liner checking in. Let's see, Chrissy Ufford Chapel. Can I stock bluegill that we catch in a nearby reservoir we fish regularly? Or is that asking for trouble? That's a double-edged sword. First of all, you need to know they're bluegills, and secondly, you need to know that they're clean and you're not bringing anything exotic. So if you get lake water out of Lake Texoma and you put bluegill in it, go throw it in your pond, you're probably going to have zebra mussels. So I'm not going to discourage you from doing that. I'm just going to tell you need to know what you're doing. If you're catching bluegill that you can identify and you got a good idea that they're young and you want to increase, here, I tell you what, here's why you would do it. You would do it if you want to enhance the gene pool or replace a missing size class. If either one of those things fits you, then I'm all for moving bluegills as long as you're not transferring anything exotic. There's our good biologist friend, Mr. Dillard, checking in from over on the eastern coast. Danny Mac, 12-pound channel cat swimming next to a floating but still moving 3-inch bluegill, ignoring it while it's scarfing feed. Well, you know what? It's kind of like if you're at Whataburger eating a Whataburger hamburger and a cow walks by, you're probably not going to butcher the cow because you got a hamburger. But they will come and get that bluegill later. Of course, your fish are pampered, dude. All right, Trey Carpenter, Mike Cottrell, just saying, I'll be looking for it. Stupid organic chemistry, that's it. I love Trey Carpenter. Trey is a retired wildlife biologist that manages ponds in the Texas Hill Country. So, and that guy spends more time in a kayak than I do sleeping, I think. John Shepard, what's your recommendation for feeding cats and bluegills? Been feeding morning and evening, or time of day important? You know, there's a little bit of debate about that, but I'm going to tell you this. For feeding catfish and bluegills, I like a morning feeding, and I like an afternoon feeding, and I like it because I can see the fish eat. Now, there's reasons to not feed then, and that's if you've got predators that have figured out your game and they're coming to eat your fish while they're on fish food. So then, you know, you can feed them after dark if you want. Channel catfish are nocturnal by nature, but if you've got catfish that are trained to fish feed, they're going to come when that feeder goes off. Then they're going to go back where it's dark after they eat. You know, so I'm going to tell you, the time of day is really not important unless nature gives you a reason not to. Like a predator's coming in and catching your big bluegills. Like a great blue heron wants to come eat your bluegills, change the time of day. But there was a little bit of a debate on the Pond Boss forum that I chimed in on today, where the question was asked about oxygen being at its lowest point at daylight, which in a pond, that's the truth. Photosynthesis occurs during the daytime. Plants take in carbon dioxide, give off oxygen. So oxygen levels in a pond are going to be at their highest point about right now, you know, just before dark. And when the sun goes down, the reverse happens. Respiration occurs. Plants start taking up oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide. So the pH changes, the oxygen levels drop, and depending on how much plant life you've got, you can actually you can watch your oxygen levels go from 6 or 7 parts per million in the afternoon to 3 parts per million at daylight. But that doesn't affect the fish in terms of seeking the best temperature and whether or not they're going to eat. Now, if the oxygen levels drop down close to lower lethal, which is something under 3 parts per million, and the fish are distressed, that's when you're going to see them stop eating. So one of the things I tell people is to feed the fish and from time to time watch their activity, because their activity is going to tell you a lot about what's going on. Like with all these back-to-back fronts that we've had across the southwest going along into the southeast for the last few weeks, right before a front blows through, the fish go in a feeding frenzy. After the front passes, they slow way, way down. And it might take 3 or 4 days before they start coming back up and feeding actively. So, let's see. There's Ben Casicles checking in from New York. Good to see Ben. I hadn't seen Ben in a while. So, let me go back to that question. Time of day is really not that important unless you have a reason not to. Jacob West, do you have a recommendation on temperature a probe that can get water temperatures at deeper water, not just the surface temp? You know what, Jacob? Those YSI 550 meters, different YSI meters will check oxygen and temperature at a depth as long as the cord is. Now, if you're a tightwad like me, you can buy from Boat Cycle or some of the fisheries supply houses. Forestry Supplies is probably one of them. You can buy a thermometer that screws down into a little cap. You take it out, got a cord on it, and you can drop that thing down in the water and pull it up real fast, and you can get a good reading on it, because it's a mercury-based thermometer, and those will work as well. But if you want to spend a few bucks, look at a YSI meter. You know, now in your case, I don't know that you need to, but I like, of course, these laser ones that take it right at the surface, but you can't get anything below the surface with that. So that's kind of a cheesy comment, cheesy answer, but I'm gonna give it to you anyway. So let's see here, Zach. What are your thoughts on perch as a replacement for bluegills, since they have a high reproduction rate of 100,000 per female? Well, Zach, you know, in Indiana and northern states, perch are, I think, a pretty reasonable choice as a forage fish, especially in largemouth bass ponds, because bass have a tendency to overeat their food chain in northern waters anyway. And bluegill only spawn once, you know, and they don't have the same numbers that yellow perch do. The only thing that complicates matters is yellow perch, they can grow fast enough that they can grow outside the length range that your predator fish that dominate that pond can eat. So now you've got a competitor. Now as long as you've got good numbers of prey, of predator fish in there to keep their numbers in check, I think yellow perch are a fine idea. I think they're a real good idea. I think they work real well together when you have multiple species of predator fish in a pond. So I do like that. Andrew Williamson, I'm checking big. Oh, looks like we lost connection for a minute. All right, we're going back. Let's see, I'm catching big bluegills out of my pond, especially when they're on the bed. Should I return those like I do my big bass or return them? You want to preserve the biggest fish. I mentioned this a little earlier, but I bet you're just not catching in. If you will preserve the biggest bluegills and throw those back, they're going to dominate the beds until younger bluegill grow up big enough to outcompete them for space. So to grow really trophy bluegills, feed them, preserve the biggest fish, feed through the winter months. Even if you cut the feed back by 90%, it's still smart to do that. Manage an overcrowded bass fishery or a trophy bass fishery. Make sure you have adequate spawning beds. Plan to recruit, which means to me that every year or so we're stocking more bluegills into that system to enhance our opportunity for new fish to grow bigger. Because we can't be guaranteed that any fish that spawn in the pond, the odds of the best making it through the gauntlet of being eaten or not eaten, odds are low. That's why you don't hear anything about somebody catching a 17 or 18 pound bass anymore. Because the odds of the fish, the best, most aggressive, the best genetic propensity, with the best environment, the best age, the best food chain every single day of its life is close to zero. We have a better chance of being struck by lightning than a bass growing to be 17 pounds. We really do. So the same theory holds true with bigger bluegills. The good news is you can feed big bluegills and get them up to 2.5 pounds. So those are your weapons. Now, let's see here. Matt Morrison, I'm in BBC. I'm going to guess that's British Columbia, but I don't really know. I'm not sure what that means, Matt. Jason Rayfield, you mentioned knowing alkalinity as being important for fertilization. Do you have any recommendations on do-it-yourself water quality test kits to use on our ponds? What's the best way to find out pH and alkalinity? Go to the Hach, H-A-C-H website. You can buy alkalinity and pH test kits from them. Let's see here. Elmo Liner, Jim Liner always checks his temps. Jim manages the lakes that used to be Ray Scott's lakes there in Petlal, Alabama, just down the road from our friend Mark Dauber. Now, Ray sold those lakes just a few years ago, and Jim manages those lakes currently for the new owner. And he's checking he says he's checking his temperatures at 18 inches for consistency, which I think that's wise. I also think it's wise to be checking at different depths so you can see where your thermocline is. If that thermocline is rising, you need to know that. So I do think it's a wise idea for those that really want to get into it, is check it at 18 inches because you're away from the hottest water, getting down to where it's a little bit more normal for that day. But if you also know that your thermocline is sitting at 5 feet today and 9 feet yesterday, that's good to know as well. Zach says the Penn State Extension says to stock bluegills with bass that are at least a year old, since bluegill grows so much faster than bass in Pennsylvania. That's probably pretty sound advice. And see here, stock bluegills with bass that are at least a year old. Yep, well, here's the reason for that. If you're stocking bass that are a year old, when the thing that happens in Pennsylvania, in upstate New York, Michigan, some of these other northern tier states, is when the bluegills spawn, they spawn later than any other part of the country in the South. So they may not even spawn until July. And once they spawn in July, they're going to have one spawn, and those babies are going to grow really fast because their food chain is at its peak. So if they got a little bit of curly leaf pondweed to hide in and the bass can't get to them, they're going to feed like crazy. They're going to grow like crazy. They'll outgrow the mouth size of a bass in about 3 or 4 months. Because fall comes in Pennsylvania in September, where in Texas, fall shows up sometimes in November, sometimes in December. So I do buy into that, Zach. Now the good news is if you can find some year-old bass that are 10 or 12 inches, you got a pretty good thing going on if you can do that. Danny Mack, I will comment long here. For the record, a pot-growing scientist at the University of Utah, I think, explains in a video what plants do. Chlorophyll creates, there we go. Okay, so he's talking about photosynthesis and respiration. Stormy Lee, in a hatchery pond, do you need to bring in new bluegill from time to time as well? You know, Stormy, I do think that's a pretty good idea. Now, what I do in my hatchery ponds is when it's time to harvest, we go harvest as many fish as we can. Some escape, and then I purposely cull through the best of the best, throw some of those best ones back so they can reproduce, and we can feed them on to get them bigger. And in that 1/10 acre pond where I described earlier about taking out all those fish, we took out probably 99% of those fish. I know some escaped because I saw it. We released some, plus I threw back about 15 or 20 really nice, thick, husky bluegills that I knew would be able to spawn. So now then, Jack Walker III says, Jack Walker 3 says, in a perfect world, feeding Aquamax MVP out of a Texas hunter feeding the bluegill, what is the ideal number of feed times and feeding time links? Number one grows to big old bass in South Georgia. I tell you what, Jack, I would say that right now, this time of year, if you're feeding 3 times a day, how much the fish will eat and clean up within about 30 seconds, you're right on the money. Now, I'm going to also tell you that as your water temperature rises, your feeding activity is going to slow down. When it does, take away one of those feedings. And I would purposely go out and observe the feeding efforts of the fish at the time the feeders go off. Don't go out there and just set the feeder off just to watch the fish feed. Go out there and watch how they feed, how actively they are feeding. And then you'll see there's going to be one time a day that they're not going to feed as heavily once the water temperature gets on up into the mid to upper 80s. And when that happens, cut that feeding out. And oftentimes it's the feeding at the hottest time of the day. So let's see here. Let me keep on going down if this thing will scroll for me. Let's look here. Let me look here. Travis Paul Smith, great show, boss. Great information. All right, cool. Thanks. Well, congratulations on your new. Yep, you know what? I'm going to go in there in a minute and see if I can hold a baby before they put her down for her. Let's see, she was born at 10:15 Monday, so Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. Baby's 3 days old. Probably won't hold her long. All right, let's see. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Looks like maybe a few closing comments. Alan Williamson, how many bluegill do you stock per acre for bass forage that's already stocked with big bluegill? You know, I'll tell you, I'm going to answer that. It depends on how many bass you've got and if you've had a culling program. The reason to stock bluegills in an existing fishery that has bluegills is because you're missing a size class that got grazed out. So if your bass are overeating the food chain, the best combination is to cull some bass in the size range, the slot that's doing the most damage to the food chain. 99 times out of 100, that's going to be bass that are 14 inches and smaller. Now think about this as you're deciding your culling program. A 16-inch bass very likely is a female. The females are going to get to be the biggest. Okay, if you catch a 16-inch bass and it's a male, that's a big male. So I would be looking at preserving most of my 16-inch bass unless the relative weights are below. If they're 85 or lower, then cull those. But culling the bass and increasing the productivity via feeding and fertility. If you need to stock some bluegills to fill a missing slot, missing size class, then do it. But understand that it's that way for a reason. It's that way because that slot got overgrazed. And the chances of you stocking fish in there and trying to money whip it without trying to cull some of the predators that are eating those fish is going to result in that missing size class again, and your billfold is going to be a lot less thick like that. So let's see, David Watkins from Athens, Texas. What is the, oh man, you got us on the edge of our seats here. Look at there, looks like Matt Fontenot's sharing it with us. Congratulations on the new, yeah, number 12. Got a little girl. You know, we have 12, and let's see there. We got, the girls are Gentry and Madeline, Madeline, and now we've got Hadley. So we have 4 little girls and 8 little boys. So we have a whole football team and a coach. Oldest grandkid's 21 years old in the Air Force. Proud of him. By the way, 7 of these grandkids are 7 and younger. Try chasing those around. Debbie loves it. So, hey, listen, I want to thank you guys once again for tuning in. I hope this helps you. And I'm thrilled to death that we've got this big of a crowd watching this show. I deeply appreciate it. I want to thank Texas Hunter for sponsoring us, and Purina Mills for creating great fish foods and sponsoring us. David Schneiderman with Easy Dock. So I'm glad you're on board with us as well. And I know I'm leaving some people out, but hey, I deeply appreciate it. And I'm going to hit the road tomorrow. I hope to be broadcasting again from home on next Wednesday. However, maybe on the road. So we'll know that then. So until then, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next week. Adios.